We're continuing on Chapter 25 of Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. 3 Decades of the Condor. A condor, according to Webster's dictionary, is a type of vulture found in the most elevated parts of the Andes, a large bird which feeds on dead animals. The name of the CIA's international assassination project is called Operation Condor. Must have been some witty agency guy's idea of providing food in the form of human corpses for the indigenous birds of South America. Condor was so big that even movie star Robert Redford had heard something about it. His late 70s thriller 3 Days of the Condor was about the assassination of undercover agents with inconvenient knowledge of super-secret covert operations. Many moviegoers can vividly recall the challenge hurled at Redford at the end of the movie by his nemesis Cliff Robertson outside the New York Times office. "Yeah, sure," sneered Robertson. "You can't give it to them. You can give it to them, but do you think they'll print it?" Today, Redford's movie seems more than a little prescient. Our NSA source, Gus, was a steely-eyed man dressed when we first met him in a tight-fitting olive drab t-shirt. He entered the restaurant where we were to rendezvous, Dan B's in Bay Street, Louis, on Mississippi Gulf Coast, unnoticed. I was asked if I was interested in taking a trip to Honduras in the summer of 1964. He began sliding into a chair and anticipated our first question. I was so eager that I learned Spanish in just 2 weeks. I ended up spending the next 2 decades of my life living in Central and South America, eventually working off 2 different complete factions of the U.S. government, Customs, and the NSA. Gus was from a tiny town of Bunkie, Louisiana, he told us, where his thirst for adventure had been nurtured by an accomplished mother who was a writer and PhD. "What did you do in South America?" we asked. "My job was to corrupt the governments of Central and South America," he replied crisply. "I was so good at it that I didn't come back to the States for 17 years. I first met Barry Seal in the lobby of the Hotel Maya in Tegucigalpa, Honduras back in the mid-70s, he continued. Barry was good friends with the owners of the hotel, the center of intrigue in Central America back then, and just by looking at each other, we both knew what the other was doing, although neither of us stated it openly to the other when we met, or for a long time afterwards. It was just understood. Besides, what we were doing wasn't as important as the fun we were having doing it. We were, both of us, making more money than we knew what to do with, and having a great old time doing it. Barry Seal was one of the smartest people I ever met, Gus told us. He was a remarkable entrepreneur. We became good friends. He was one of the few people I ever felt I could trust, and while I was in Bolivia in the mid-'80s, he was one of my closest associates. We showed him the pictures of Seal from Mexico City in 1963. That picture was taken in the nightclub in the Aristos Hotel on Heidelberg Street off Avenida Reforma in the Zona Rosa. He responded immediately. "I know it well. I call it the Angus Restaurant." "When did you and Barry—" He stopped our question with a wave of his hand. "What have you learned about Operation Condor?" he demanded. "We began with what is nakedly and undoubtedly Operation Condor's most spectacular event. Just after dawn on July 17, 1980, paramilitary squads in combat fatigues and black ski masks, featureless except for swastika armbands, roared through the downtown streets of the capital city of La Paz, Bolivia, firing on anything that moved. They were soon joined in mutiny by marauding bands of Bolivian soldiers. The cocaine coup had begun. While long-suffering Bolivia had suffered 150 coups before, this one became the worst torture and killing spree in Bolivian history. When it became public in the mid-90s, President Clinton became close to apologizing, and it had all been engineered through Operation Condor. A month before, 6 of Bolivia's biggest drug traffickers met with military conspirators to hammer out a financial deal for future protection of the cocaine trade. According to Peter Dale Scott, in Cocaine Politics, a La Paz businessman said the coming putsch should be called the cocaine coup. He was right, and today it is. An Argentine secret policeman told DEA agent Michael Levine the CIA knew all about the coup. You North Americans amaze me. Don't you speak to your own people, the officer wondered. Do you think Bolivia's government, or any government in South America, can be changed without your government and mine being aware of it? When Levine asked why that affected the planned DEA investigation, the Argentine answered, because the same people being named as drug dealers are the people who are helping to rid Bolivia of leftists. 3 weeks later, Levine met with a Bolivian drug trafficker who outlined plans for the new government, in which his niece, Sonia Atala, a major cocaine supplier, would be in a very strong position. Barry Seal, we will soon learn, worked with Sonia Atala. The masked paramilitary thugs in the coup turned out not to even be Bolivians, but spoke French, Italian, and German, and Spanish with Argentine accents. Their presence in Bolivia would later be ascribed to the CIA and Operation Condor. General Luis Garza Meza was in total control. His first act was to release drug traffickers from jail and destroy police records of trafficking. He had brought in the neo-fascist paramilitary squads wearing swastika armbands, calling themselves the Fiancés of Death. Garza immediately put the Interior Ministry under the control of the nephew of Roberto Suarez, the Bolivian kingpin who went on to become exactly what he styled himself as, the King of Cocaine. I knew Robert Suarez very well, Gus said quietly, interrupting our narrative. I was married to one of the Suarezes. Guess who financed the cocaine coup with $50 million? It's the same man who the year before had financed the successful coup in Honduras. The CIA's great good friend, Jim Mata Ballesteros. He is a man who gives the term asset a whole new meaning. The Bolivian general and his interior minister, Minister Ark, a pot-bellied gangster in a metal-laden uniform, were in business with Roberto Suarez, Bolivia's biggest cocaine trafficker. DEA agent Mike Levine, the big white lie, recounts how local counterparts informed him that a coup was imminent in Bolivia, and that Argentina and the United States, both worried about Bolivia's leftist government, were encouraging the plotters. Levine was in way over his head, Gus told us. He himself was part of Operation Condor, though he doesn't admit it. And who would? Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie had organized the Condor paramilitary groups. Barbie, known in France as the Butcher of Lyon, lived in Bolivia for years under the alias of Klaus Altmann. I knew Klaus Barbie, Gus stated calmly. We, American intelligence, worked with him. We had to. He virtually owned the damn country. Klaus Barbie controlled the Bolivian military, so we had to do business with him. I remember asking him at lunch one day, did he ever have any regrets about World War II? He said just that I never finished killing the bastards. When an outspoken Bolivian socialist, Marcelo Quiroga, called for a national strike to protest the Bolivian coup. Military agents dressed in civilian clothes arrived at his La Paz Union headquarters in ambulances and stormed the meeting, reportedly killing him. He was shot but did not die instantly. He kept alive for hours by Argentinian torture experts, adept in keeping a person living for the longest time possible while inflicting the maximum pain. Day later, his castrated and tortured body was found outside La Paz. His wife, Cristina Quiorga, was at home when a friend called, saying everyone at the meeting had been taken prisoner. All that was left of her husband's office was blood. They shot Marcelo, but he didn't die. Quiorga Santa Cruz said 13 years later on a visit to Chicago, in which she showed reporters a copy of a newspaper article featuring a picture of her husband's beaten face. Only years after the murder, when she saw this picture in a German magazine that was brought to them by a former Bolivia minister of the interior, did she learn what really happened. Enraged, she enlisted the families of others killed in the cocaine coup of 1980 and went to court. The man they went after was Army Commander Luis Garcia Meza, leader of the Junta that seized power that day, and notorious for his involvement in drug trafficking. The significance of the coup went beyond the borders of Bolivia. The impoverished nation had just become the latest battleground in a war. Bolivia's neighbors to the south were ruled by authoritarian right-wing regimes, but to the north, the rest of Spanish-speaking South America was governed by democratic civilian regimes. The Argentinians and Chileans saw the dangerous ideology of democracy arriving at their borders, and they didn't like it, said one Andean-packed diplomat, nor apparently did U.S. proconsuls. Forget politics, said one Bolivian businessman. For people here, the question was, who is going to control the cocaine trade? For the United States, the cocaine coup was a diplomatic triumph, the result of the coordinated intelligence efforts of Operation Condor, and that it ushered in Bolivia's most repressive regime in the 20th century. Well, that may well have been precisely the point. Operation Condor was the result of years of careful planning, designed to take over an entire hemisphere, Gus explained. It was the conquest and the plundering of an entire nearly virgin continent for the benefit of the American intelligence operatives involved in the operation. 2 years after Fidel Castro had marched into Havana and overthrown Batista, Eisenhower and Treasury Secretary Robert Anderson had briefed the incoming President Kennedy. Large amounts of U.S. capital, Anderson said, were planned for investment in Latin America. But the investors were holding back, waiting to see whether or not we can cope with the Cuban situation. Thus was planted the seed for the schools of America, which cultivated intimate relations between American armed forces and those of Latin America and the Caribbean, relations whose practical results were kept from the public until a lawsuit in Paraguay produced 5 tons of reports bearing the imprint of Operation Condor, detailing the arrests, interrogations, and disappearances of thousands of political prisoners during General Alfredo Stroessner's 35-year dictatorship of Paraguay. When Paraguayan dictator Stroessner considered a neo-Nazi even by his admirers, was finally toppled. Word of Condor finally began to emerge. Participating in Operation Condor were the security forces of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay, all of which were more or less military regimes, until the discovery of the 5 tons of documents and files in Asuncion. The existence of Operation Condor was just another wacky conspiracy theory. It had been a nightmare reality they had been forced to live through. Paraguayans quickly named the files the Archives of Terror. The Operation Condor documents described a secret U.S. plan for the security forces in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia to crush left-wing political dissidents. The plan formalized cooperation among police and military forces in all 6 countries, tying them to the generals to Washington, who provided the funding for the operation. These South American intelligence services, it was revealed, all used their blueprint American military manuals that trace back to 1965 Army program to train military police and paramilitary forces throughout Southeast Asia and Latin America. The direct precursor to the infamous assassination program, Operation Phoenix in Vietnam. Condor allowed security officers to take part in interrogations, pursue people across borders, and order surveillance on citizens who sought asylum in other countries. In 1986, Senate investigators began to get wind of what had been going on inside the country in the CIA's name since the 70s, where the nerve center for as much of this was Miami. Jack Blum, Special Counsel of the Senate Subcommittee in Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, said, "Holy shit, what's going on? Do we franchise out pieces of Florida to foreign intelligence organizations to conduct illegal activities?" He had just listened to Leandro Sanchez Ricey's story, just a small piece of Condor. Sanchez Ricey told Blum that in the late 1970s, while serving with the Argentine military intelligence, he had set up a secret money laundering operation in Florida with the blessing of the CIA to help General Garcia's bloody 1980 coup. Sanchez later became a DEA informant. Blum notified the Senate Intelligence Committee about Sanchez Reese, but they didn't delve into his story. A CIA-sanctioned operation in Florida run by the Argentine military had subverted official U.S. policy supposed to be anti-drug. The CIA had just brought to power a highly organized gang of drug thugs. What was Barry Seal's role in all of this? Louisiana State Police files indicate they were aware Seal was setting up large numbers of dummy companies in Honduras as early as 1977, almost 2 years before the cocaine coup. These dummy companies were not used by Seal for his own smuggling efforts. He had the dummy Cayman and Panamanian entities. When the boys lost the election to Carter in '76, Gary Hemming said they realized they'd been caught napping. They were going to do what it took to ensue that it never happened again. They were going to be goddamn sure they wouldn't be any more nasty October surprises. The results of their efforts was personified in the person who became known as the Queen of Cocaine, Sonia Atala. Sonia, a big-time dope smuggler in Bolivia and Colombia, who was the most singularly evil character in DEA agent Levine's book, The Big White Lie, may also be one of the most important figures of the Iran-Contra scandal to avoid exposure. Gus, our NSA source, had known her well in his quasi-official capacity. It was what was called an in-country private operation in Bolivia during those years, he told us. I saw that the deal was they didn't ask how much money you made, but if something happened to you, you were on your own. Sonia Atala, a slight figure often dressed in business suits, had almond-shaped eyes and high cheekbones that hinted of Indian blood, but her skin was fair, her jewelry expensive, and she might have been mistaken for some senator's petite little aide-de-camp, were it not for her piercing and predatory dark eyes. With American help, she consolidated her position as the Bolivian Snow Queen after the coup, becoming the main link between Bolivian cocaine producers and the Colombian cartels. According to former DEA agent Levine, she was responsible for shipping more cocaine into the United States than any person I had ever known of. The CIA, he charged, helped Atala by destroying her competitors, protecting her from prosecution as she sold drugs to Americans, and paying her a small fortune in tax dollars for her service. Sonia Atala and Roberto Suarez avoided prosecution while trillions were made. Their assets have revealed the ties between the U.S. intelligence community and Latin American drug traffickers, Levine writes. When she was finally caught, the biggest drug baroness of them cut a deal with the federal government that essentially let her go free in return for her help in prosecuting a few underlings, former allies, and customers like former Minister of Cocaine Luis Arce. Being really connected means never having to do the time. She testified, Arce told me that the gringos had cut off financial aid to Bolivia and the government needed money. They, the gringos, ought to take care of their borders because we're going to cover them with cocaine, to inundate our gringos with cocaine. Inundating the gringos with coke? It sounds a lot like a diabolical communist plot. We wondered, had Arce's speechwriter ever been to Guatemala? Levine wrote. This all came amid disquieting rumors that at least one of the biggest cocaine labs on the continent, the one at Huanchaca, was run by the CIA to finance covert South American operations like the Contras. Atala later slipped back to Bolivia, where she was able to recover most of her assets and jump right back into the drug business. American drug pilot Bo Abbott was part of the same organization, he says, though just a bit player. He was caught hauling a load of cocaine out of Bolivia. Abbott, a native Virginian, was born and raised in Richmond, where his mother was a secretary for the U.S. Department of Justice. As an informant, red dope hauler for the DEA, Abbott hopscotched across Central and South America, flying planes laden with drugs, money, and guns to destinations ordained by his government handlers. He points to Cochabamba, Bolivia, in the Central Mountains, and Santa Cruz to the east. This is where he used to land, he says, to make contact with Bolivia's biggest drug dealers. They keep their planes in Asunción, Paraguay, until they need to fly a load, Abbott says, describing a web of dirt strips and supply centers that comprised the Central and South American drug trade. Abbott said he had frequent contact in Bolivia with the people he called the two biggest drug kingpins, Roberto Suarez and Sonia Atala. Why have neither of these names been as widely publicized in the United States as Colombia's Pablo Escobar? Mike Levine, a former DEA bureau chief in Buenos Aires, also identified Suarez and Atala as the pivotal Bolivian drug merchants. Abbott says Atala had a warehouse in the free trade zone in Colón, Panama, and that he witnessed drug flights in and out of that facility. Even today, reports sometimes surface that the Colón Free Trade Zone is a major hub in the hemisphere's drug and money trade. Our NSA source confirmed. I saw Barry a lot at Noriega's private airport in the free trade zone. What he had begun to learn, Abbott claimed, was that the U.S. government did not really want to catch the major drug kingpins. Instead, the goal was to control the traffic and protect certain dealers. He claims it was the CIA's way of maintaining political control over Central and South American countries, the objective of Operation Condor. Abbott stated that he had seen how the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and the Israeli Mossad controlled the world's cocaine trade, skimming off the black slush funds to finance covert political operations and the occasional assassination. The hats are always at it, man. I was not a decision maker, he says. I was a grunt at the bottom. If I hadn't been making money, I doubt I would have done it. Court records show that he was a federal drug informant. The DEA taught him how to fly with special training for takeoffs and landings in short hazardous runways, and he drifted, federal court files show, into and out of places like Bolivia, Belize, Panama, and Nicaragua with frequency. Abbott said he and a former DEA agent, since sent to prison, flew multiple plane loads of drugs into the Addison, Texas airport, where the DEA maintains its major U.S. base. And Abbott had worked for the same organization as did Sonia Atala. Sonia was the most dangerous person I ever met, NSA agent Gus avers. She was absolutely fearless and also crazy, a lethal combination. One time in Puerto Rico, I was at a party at her condo in a high-rise directly overlooking the international airport. She was expecting a plane load of product and excused herself, saying she'd return in an hour and for the party to continue without her. When her twin-engine plane landed, federal agents began to drive out to surround it. And then we saw Sonia screeching right onto the runway, shooting a machine gun out of the window of a red Corvette on the oncoming federal agents. It was surreal watching a regular Wild West shootout from a high-rise. Sonia stood there and took incoming fire from customs agents, he continued, and held them off long enough for most of the cocaine, at least 60 keys, to be offloaded into the trunk of her car, and for the plane to escape. Then she took off and led the agents on a high-speed chase through the narrow streets of San Juan, offloaded in a safe house, and was back at her party an hour later. Another time she and I were at a strip club in Puerto Rico together, he continued. We were sitting in the front row watching the show. Sonia liked girls. She later lived with Mafia Don Joe Bonanno's granddaughter, and she saw a girl she wanted dancing in the show and said to me, "See that girl? I'm going to have her." She was going to have her too. I could see how determined she was, and she called the dancer over and had her join us at our table and poured her a glass of champagne and then started laying her line on her. Sonia said, "I want to take care of you. I want you to live with me." "Hey, I'm not like that," the dancer said. "I already have a home." So Sonia pulled out a paper bag full of money and dumped a mound of $100 bills right out onto the table. "Take however much you want," she said to the girl, and damned if the girl didn't pick up a wad of hundreds, what must have been about $5,000, and then smile at Sonia and say, "Where did you say we lived?" Sonia ran the cocaine biz in Bolivia, Gus told us, and that was where the business was run from. The guys you heard about, the Ochoas and the Escobars and the Ledirs, they were just vice presidents fronting for the company. Barry Seal worked directly for Sonia Atala. And that's it for today.